Tanse, my name is Natasha Delany, and welcome to episode 8 of the Indigenous Projects and Events Speakers Bureau series. So, I'm the founder of Indigenous Projects and Events and this platform, and within this platform, our goal is to amplify Indigenous voices, foster education, and create meaningful spaces for advocacy and community empowerment. Through this speaker series, conferences, and through digital content, we highlight critical issues such as truth and reconciliation strategies, health and wellness, child welfare, Indigenous rights, and cultural preservation through our various members of the Indigenous Speakers Bureau, ensuring that Indigenous perspectives are heard and valued. Today, I'm super honored to introduce Fiona Moar, who is a passionate educator, advocator, and changemaker. Fiona is Cree and Ojibwe, treaty to Lake St. Martin with ties to Saddle Lake. And Fiona is deeply committed to raising awareness about child welfare, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and two-spirited, homelessness, RCMP reform, and residential schools. Using her voice on social media platforms such as TikTok and in public spaces, she educates, challenges systems, and inspires others to take action. In this episode, we are going to dive into her journey, the challenges that she's tackled, and the power of using voice for change. So without further ado, here is Fiona. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for, joining the Indigenous Speakers Bureau and for showing up today. So, would you be able to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background, including your Cree and Ojibwe heritage and the ties that you have to Saddle Lake?
Absolutely. So I am Fiona Moar, or Miss Moore, my Indigenous names are She Who Speaks the Truth or Standing Strong Echo Maker. I am treaty to Lake St. Martin, as you said, and paternally and maternally, I'm from Saddle Lake. Sorry.
So your mom was from Saddle Lake and your dad's from Lake St. Martin. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you grow up in Saddle Lake or?
No, I actually bounced around a lot. I went to 15 schools by the time I graduated. So I've just visited briefly. And unfortunately, the amount of awareness that I've brought to Lake St. Martin, I'm not the most welcome there. So.
Okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I've just brought awareness. Like we've had election fraud and a high drug trafficking, and a lot of violence there. And I've talked about the corrupt chief and council and how they don't have the resources. We were flooded a couple years ago, and we had a relocation, and we had an opportunity to rebuild, a fresh start and amazingly. And it's kind of just been the same old story that we had before and gone downhill. And I've done a lot of talking about it, and they don't really. Yeah.
So for the viewers who aren't sure or know what. Hello?
Sorry, you froze there a little bit.
Oh, was that me? Okay. So for the viewers who aren't sure where Lake St. Martin is, where is it?
It's northern Manitoba,
Okay.
but it's one of those more remote reserves that are, and I talk about this a lot, that unless you're in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, you don't get a lot of resources. Like rural Manitoba is very left behind, and they have some of the saddest statistics. And I
Wow.
guess that's why I try to bring awareness to it. Is I'm just trying to bring change, and I'm very hopeful and grateful now that we have an Indigenous premier. But
Yeah.
it's a province with a lot of problems.
So, what inspired you to become an educator and an advocate?
Well, I've been a parent my entire adult life. My daughter is now 18, and I became an educator to just try to um, become a better role model. Like all my career paths were going towards taking care of people because that's what I was used to. I was a healthcare aide, and then I was a support worker for the mentally disabled, and then that just came to education, and I loved it. And actually, during COVID, I wasn't able to reach my students as much, so that's when I started the online platform, and then it just grew from there because there was such a need for education on Indigenous issues. There was so much misconception. And at the time that I started, there was the whole story about the $5 Indian and the $5 treaty. And I don't even want to talk about that, but it was just crazy, the misconceptions that were there. And I just did my research, and I take an issue and I'll read a couple articles, and then I just make it into a 60-second script. You know,
Wow.
for people who aren't able to read the news every day, or who are more auditory learners and visual learners. And I'm just aware of the different spectrums of learning. So just trying to reach everybody on different platforms, right?
That's super amazing, that you had the idea to do that in terms of just reading an article and then doing a 60-second clip it sounds like, from your perspective. Is it from your perspective, or is it a general summary?
It always starts off a general summary, and then I finish off with either a question that makes you think, or just my personal opinion, and just ending it with something that leaves people just thinking about that issue, and asking the questions that the mainstream media isn't always willing to answer.
So you mentioned that your students weren't able to reach you. Who are your students?
So predominantly in my career, I was at a middle school, and
Mhm.
I love that age group. But during COVID, we moved to virtual learning, and I'm just an education assistant. So I just became very much the background person, whereas I was used to being hands-on with my students and being able to build that repertoire, and having face to face. And then it was going to be, okay, I was just going to be background, nobody was going to see me, nobody was going to, and that kind of broke my heart. So I started the TikTok to just, that's where the kids were. And I started it to be fun and just want to reach my students. And then it became really serious really quickly. And I still try to have fun, but
Yeah,
that's
you
where I
just
make the most difference. So
can't kind of went with it. How many followers do you have on TikTok?
136,000.
Wow, that's impressive. Are you able to see like the statistics? Like what are the majority of your who are the majority of your followers?
I've always I have about a 60-40 ratio, 60% female, 40% male. So it's always been pretty balanced. And again, it's mostly Canadian, but again, that's 60-40. Like I'll have 60% Canadian and 40% Americans. And it's funny because a lot of Americans, they want to know about Canadian issues, but they're just not being they're not hearing it in American mainstream media, right? So I just, I break it down for them. And yeah,
That's
I think,
amazing.
yeah,
So
thank you.
you've been vocal about Indigenous issues on TikTok. What impact have you seen from your online presence?
Um, I think people are just becoming more comfortable talking about issues. And then I find when I break it down and make it more easier to understand, then there's more conversations happening around it. And I find this so funny, but people quote me all the time, like have my quotes back to me, and I'm just like, you know what? I wrote that, so I guess I shouldn't be embarrassed to hear it back. But it's always
as an Indigenous entrepreneur, and as somebody that's been on her own healing journey, that's been something that I've struggled with and myself, and have just recently, I feel like, felt more comfortable doing, with being more vocal about these challenges and these issues that I face as an Indigenous woman and an entrepreneur. How has this journey helped you in your own self-awareness and as your own journey as an Indigenous woman?
For my personal growth, it's made me more vocal in social situations where I wouldn't have been.
Mhm.
Especially in the staff room, like in a public school, there's many conversations, and there's always a little bit of a touch of racism, I want to say, because there's so much
Uncompromised.
ignorance about
Yeah,
issues, right? And
yeah,
so whereas before I would have just sat quietly and not wanted to stir the pot, so to speak, whereas now I am the first one to jump in there, and the first one to just politely, educate people, because now I have the words to say it, if that makes sense.
yeah.
um I feel like I gave myself a voice that I didn't have before, and I hope that I help my students have a voice. Sorry,
Mhm.
because like I went to 15 schools by the time I graduated, and I only had maybe two Indigenous teachers,
Yeah.
and there was never an Indigenous female teacher, and I want to be, um, show my students that they can do anything, that it just make your voice heard.
That's just so inspiring to me. Um, and it's something that, like, I've been talking about a lot, as part of Indigenous projects and events, having non-Indigenous clients and being educated and aware of what an unconscious bias is, right? Like, it's very similar to, my own personal journey of growing up in foster homes, and my white foster parents saying, well, I'm not racist, but then their actions and their energy and their behaviors don't match the words, and it's confusing, right? And it wasn't until, I started my healing journey and started to learn about what an unconscious bias is, and started to understand, like, that most people aren't conscious because our brains scientifically are created to create mental shortcuts just so that we can, like, problem solve faster. And so these mental shortcuts is what creates racism, right? And so they're not conscious. It's not like and that's the biggest thing I find with having some of these conversations, is that, like, it's not meant to blame, it's not meant to shame. It really is about creating awareness, and to encourage, um, ourselves and other people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to question our thinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes you don't even realize that it's happening and that you're thinking that, and then you're like, wait, why? That is a very colonial mindset. And
Yeah.
you have to stop and remember, like, where it's coming from. And it's so ingrained in us sometimes that it's hard not to, especially when you're raised in an urban environment, because unfortunately a lot of cities in Canada are just, they have those inherent biases.
And I was just, thinking and talking to somebody about this the other day, just about, even as an Indigenous person, and some of these, uh, ways that we do things today as Indigenous people, and how they are very colonial. Like, even our chief and council, like, those that is a very colonial political government, right? It's not the way that things were done before, that hierarchy. and ladder of violence. Like that is another colonial thing, right? Like being isolated, being like without voices for how long that we've been without voices, and turning on each other, right? Like believing that there's only so much, that there's not, you know, enough. If another Indigenous woman or a person's success happens, that it somehow takes away from our own, because there's only a limited amount of success available for us as Indigenous people, right? Like these are all colonial perspectives and ways of being that we've integrated into our culture as Indigenous people, and it's not helping us.
It really isn't. And that's like, I made it my New Year's goal. I think it was last year, and I made a TikTok about it, that I was just going to try to uplift, like, even just, well, it was females at the time, but it was like, I see it more and more, that whole female jealousy. And it's especially in the Indigenous community. And like, I'm just trying to make it a point, and you have to really go out of your habits and just make it a
Like
habit to uplift and not have that, that little voice in your head, right?
like those feelings of jealousy, like myself too, like is something that I have and have to continue to question in terms of my own thinking, right? Like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit jealous here. Like, why do I feel that way? Where is that stemming from? Like, which version of myself from the past is trying to like speak up here, right? And like, how can I nurture her and let her know that it's okay, right?
Mm-hmm. It's all
Um,
about that healing.
yeah. So you've spoken at events like, is it Dolphins First Orange Shirt Day? Is that how you say that? Yeah. So
Yeah.
the commemoration and the Women's Strike 2024. How did these experiences shape your approach to public speaking?
Um, well, and I loved how I did my public speaking, because I was able to take these issues and personalize them, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I don't often do that in my TikToks. I don't often talk about um, how it affected me personally, or just anecdotal stories, because I always think I'm taking away from it, or I just, when I'm talking about an issue, I'm trying to bring awareness to this person's story or this person's story, and I don't want to be talking about myself, right? So when I got to do the public speaking, I was really able to share just about myself and get to know people and have that personal anecdote with people, and just putting a face to an issue where people may not have known that I was personally affected.
Yeah, how were you personally affected by some of these issues, that like child welfare, MMIW, homelessness, RCMP reform? How has your life been personally affected by these issues?
I was personally affected by all of them. um, Being a mother at 18, I was very much judged. I actually thought I was going to be a birth alert, but I wasn't. And I remember thinking that whole time, like even as a young parent, like I was judged. And I lived in a very small French white town. And it did happen. She was taken away a month before her third birthday, and then again when she was 11. Um, and MMIW, my sister is missing. She's been missing since I was 24, and
Mm.
we're not allowed to like report it missing, because she comes up on Facebook every couple of years, makes a profile, doesn't add anybody, but just it's kind of to let us know she's still safe. But we haven't had contact. I haven't had contact with her in so long. I was homeless at 16.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Yeah, and that's why I can't talk about stuff like this, because and I don't think we talk about enough about how all of these things are intersectional trauma. So many Indigenous people are affected by multiple, you know, and we just focus on this and focus on that, but it's this whole backpack of trauma that Indigenous people have to carry and have to try to heal from. And I'm just trying to
Yeah.
just trying to help people heal through education, you know, through understanding and through knowledge.
It's so true, because it's like that, having to heal and to be with all of that while also just trying to like succeed in life, like build businesses, or succeed in our professions, or like grow and belong. um it's it's super true. And again, like the unconscious biases that we also have to face. um Non-Indigenous people don't realize that they can walk into a store and their automatic thought isn't like, I feel like I'm going to be judged here. I got to make sure that I'm like acting
My hands are
normal.
here. I'm not touching my phone. I have a normal face on. I can't look like I have to be dressed a proper way. Like white people don't have to think about these things. They don't walk into a store having this laundry list of checklists to make sure that you don't look like you're going to steal. And then even after that laundry list is still checked, then you're still profiled. And it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Like it's absolutely frustrating.
Yeah. So, how does your cultural identity influence your work as an educator and an advocate?
And I think just I both of my parents went to residential schools, so
Okay.
I wasn't raised to be proud of my culture. I wasn't raised to speak my language, and both of my parents were fluent speakers of their languages, but they used it as a secret language to keep secrets from us kids, you know. So it's this journey of trying to learn my culture while trying to educate people about it, and
Mhm.
a lot of people are on this path, and that's why I try to make it in different formats, because people are different learners, right? I myself have just started trying to learn Cree. It's a little bit it's a little bit frustrating because the dialect is so different, and then you hear phrases and then the memories come back because that phrase is a familiar phrase that you grew up with, but you just never knew what it meant, right?
Well, and the other thing is like there's Manitoba Cree, and then there's like Alberta Cree. I don't know, like if it's Woodland Cree and then Plains Cree. And then like, people don't understand that there's differences there. Like who I sweat with, they adopted me as their daughter. But so my papa, he has his lodge. He's Plains Cree, but then his his wife, my adopted mom, she is Woodland Cree from Manitoba, northern Manitoba. And so when the grandfathers they come into the lodge, um, his wife, like she doesn't quite understand because they speak through him in Plains Cree. She doesn't understand what they're saying, even though they both speak Cree. It's different. So that knowing that, you know, makes it a little bit more challenging too.
Because the syllabics are so different in this one to this one, right? So it's like you'll understand a few words will be similar, but yeah, it's a little bit frustrating. And I had to go back to like, which dialect am I going to learn, and
Mhm.
who am I going to learn from, right? Because these are such big questions.
Yeah. So, what has been the most rewarding moment in your advocacy journey so far?
Um, I think just I would really like to say the public speaking that I got to do, especially specifically the women's strike.
Mhm.
Um, I got to I was reached out by the organization, and I used my connections to get Janice Irwin to speak, and she's one of my, political idols. And I just being able to get up there and speak with other powerful women and hear their stories, and um, being that Indigenous representation that people that I felt like I, made a difference, and people wanted to speak to me after and really hear my story. And I felt like they actually cared, and there was a huge audience there. And like, getting to speak in Edmonton was a huge thing for, especially like, coming from small town Manitoba. So I really like that.
That's awesome. I love that. Um, so, in the next 5 years, where do you see yourself? Are there any specific initiatives or projects or events that you'd really like to be a part of?
In the next 5 years, I would really like to be able to make this a career. And I've been, putting it out there in the universe for the last couple of years. But just, I want to be a freelance journalist like Brandy Moore. Like, she travels, and
Mhm.
she's just my idol. I just love her. I started writing short Indigenous short stories about creations. I don't know if
Mm.
you've seen a few of those TikToks, but I'd like to publish that book and make a career of being a freelance journalist. So
You
that's,
said, sorry, you said you're creating short books, or what are they called? Short?
sorry, short stories
Okay.
about Indigenous creations. And I just want to just inspire the youth. I feel like there's not enough Indigenous authors out there.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of my students who just, love to dabble in writing and love to dabble in drawing. And I would just love to see more Indigenous illustrators and more Indigenous artists in the mainstream.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then just in terms of Brandy Morin, like she's so inspirational. Because I did a little bit of modeling, like when I first entered my recovery journey, like 6 years ago, and that's when she had a line out, um, where she used a lot of syllabics within the like leggings, and I did a photo shoot for her. But yeah, she's super down to earth and super nice woman.
I
Um,
actually, and I love Brandy Moore, and I didn't know that she designed clothes. That's so cool. I'll have to look them
yeah.
up.
I don't know if she does it like anymore or if that's something that she's gonna continue doing. I hope so, because they were awesome and the leggings were beautiful.
Well, I actually just went to the Indigenous fashion show this weekend in
Okay,
Edmonton, and it was like
yeah.
the first one. It was Indigenous Fashion
Edmonton.
Empower Collective.
Yes,
I
yeah.
have that in the wrong order. But yeah, it was amazing. And just seeing the Indigenous designers and how much it meant to them, like when they got up after, and it was so moving and so inspirational. I loved being able to attend that.
That's awesome. Um, so what advice would you give Indigenous youth who want to use their voices for change?
Um, don't put too much pressure on yourself and just start speaking. I feel like so many people just they see this level of, they see a TikTok and they just think, oh, I could never do that, and then they don't even try. You know what I mean? Like, I could go back to my very first TikToks, and I was literally reading from a paper. It was awful, and I just did it. I just tried, and the more you do it, the better you get at it, and practice makes better.
I love that. That's also kind of like in terms of like speaking on stage. Like I remember speaking for the first time. I wasn't even on stage. It was like in front of maybe a handful of women. I don't even know if there was 10 women there. And it was nerve-wracking. And I thought it was like the biggest thing in the whole entire world, even though it was like, you know, just a small little room with these 10 women in it, compared to some of the places where, I speak now, and I'm sure it's been the same for you, right? Where, yeah, you just do it scared.
Well, my first time, that was in Dauphin, and I was so grateful to be invited to speak at the very first Orange Shirt Day event. But And even though it was a community that I've lived in my entire adult life, like I knew all these people, I couldn't believe the crowd that showed up. I thought for sure it would only be a dozen people, and I showed up and it had to be 70, 80. And then I had to get up there and speak, and they said my name, and I thought my knees were just gonna buckle under me. Like, you can go back to that TikTok, and I looked so nervous, but I did it, and I got through it, and just gets better from here.
Awesome. So, what is one message that you want people to take away from your work?
Ask, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. I think so often we are fed this story in mainstream media, and then we just accept it at face value when there's so much more to the issue, and so much change can be coming from these issues, and they don't have to be keep compiling. We need to be asking the hard questions to be getting the change that we need.
I love it. Thank you so much, Fiona, for showing up today and letting me ask you a whole bunch of questions. For being brave and inspiring everybody, including me, to use our voice, to show up scared, to show up even when your voice is shaking, just to continue to speak our truths. And if people want to find you, if people want to find Fiona, we do have her links in the show notes. You are on TikTok, you are on Facebook, and you are on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Yes.
Do you have a website?
No.
Okay. If you also want to book Fiona for your next conference or event, you can do so at www.indigenousprojectsevents.com. That will also be in the show notes. Thank you again, Fiona. And like and subscribe. And we will see you again in the next episode.
Miigwech. Hi, hi.
Hi, hi.